Hey there, welcome to Read Through the Word. It is January the 12th, and we have seen Jacob's plight in his life. Boy, whew, he's had a lot going on here with Laban. In our reading today, we see how his wealth had increased. We also see that he's trying to flee from Laban. Then we see how Laban pursues him. And, he really has not ever had a great relationship with Laban because of everything that happened with Rachel and Leah. So I could imagine that he has a little animosity to his father, towards his father-in-law. That's just me. I might be reading something in here to that, but I could imagine how he could have that. But he is leaving and he flees after the whole situation with the spotted and the streaked and all of that, and calves and cattle and all. And so he's a sheep, and he's leaving. And then they finally get to a place where they have a treaty between the two of them. And you kind of can take a breath at that moment and you think, okay, Jacob can have some peace. Because, in all intents and purposes, Laban was his enemy. But, boy, he's got another enemy to face. He is going to now, today, face his brother. Now, let me just flip over here. Oh, my goodness. Where were we when all of that happened? I wasn't even prepared to talk about this, so I'm kind of looking through where we are. But he flees over in Genesis 27 because of what happened on the deathbed with Isaac. And he says, okay, the mom says, Rebecca says, you need to get on out of here. And so he does, and he flees many, many, many years ago. What happens when a situation is left unchecked for many, many, many years? We talked a while back about, several lessons ago, about the disgruntled behavior and the animosity between Ishmael and his relatives. And we have the same a situation, not for the same reason, but this animosity, that years have grown roots of animosity and anger and bitterness between Jacob and Esau. And that Jacob has got to be dreading facing his brother. Have you ever been in that situation where you're going to have to cross paths with someone that you have not ended things well with, and it's inevitable you're going to have to see him? I remember years ago, I had a situation where I had a little moment, I want to call it, of intense fellowship with a girl at church, and about something really silly. And I remember seeing her, hoping she wouldn't see me, and I would turn and go the other way so that I would not have to confront her, or not even confront her. I didn't even want to walk down the hall by her. I didn't want to sit near her in a class. I didn't want to be in a class with her. And I remember that feeling of just, oh gosh, what if our daughters were the same age in the same class? It just was a big old mess. It's hard to believe that can happen in church with Christian women, but it does. But I remember that. And we did have peace, came out of that situation a few years later. We were able to reconcile that. Maybe one day I can tell you that whole story of how God made that happen. He put us in the same room, and I ended up being her teacher in a Bible study. So I'll just leave it at that, and maybe one day I can come back to this story. Oh, and yeah, her name's Wendy also. It just gets even more ironic. But anyways, so you have that moment. Maybe you have that in your head. Maybe you have someone in your life right now that's that way, where you are planning your life around not seeing that person at the ball field. or at church or in the nursery or at the grocery store, or you're in a store and you see her and you turn your buggy the other way so you don't have to go. Now, don't tell me y'all hadn't done that, because I know you have, and you're sitting there nodding at me right now. Yeah, we've done that. So how do we address this issue? First off, we have to know that hostility and roots of bitterness and anger are not part of God's plan for us. They are not seeds of peace. God tells us in his word over in the New Testament to live at peace with others as much as it is up to us. So we are to make efforts to make peace with someone. Now, we can't determine what the response is going to be to our efforts to be at peace with someone. We have no control over that, but we have control over ourselves and what our response is and what God would have us do. So we have this situation where we're supposed to be living in peace, but what do we do? How do we make this right? Well, Jacob faced God before he faced his enemy. And I suggest that we do that. And I believe that we should be with God concerning the matter that's caused the problem. And we need to be with him until he gives us a peace to move forward with that situation. Now, we can pray about it one day, and it doesn't mean we need to go meet up with that person the next day. I really believe, because God desires peace in his children and among his children, especially believers, that he will guide the situation, and he'll put that right in front of you when you're not expecting it, but your heart is prepared for it. Just like it happened with me and the other Wendy. My heart was prepared because he'd been dealing with me, and I did not know that he was dealing with her as well. So he prepared the situation. I didn't make the situation happen. So we need to meet with God before we face our quote unquote enemy. That's a stretch of a word. Adversary. I don't know. We'll have to think of another word maybe other than enemy. But we see that Jacob reminded God of his words. Over in verse 11, he remembered all of God's blessings in verse 10, and he restated God's promise in verse 12. Now, how could he remind God of his words, and how could he remember the blessings, and how could he restate the promise? How could he do that? Because he had spent time with God. Jacob had a relationship with God, in which he spoke to God and he spent time with God. Yes, he did some things that were kind of shady, and he did some things that were deceitful in his life. His name has been changed. He is a new person, and he is in the place where he can dialogue with God. And the only way to dialogue with God in this present day and in our situations is to have an experience with God every single day through his word. You're doing that right now as you're reading your Bible every day. And as you engage in Christian communication through Read Through the Word and through our Facebook page of Read Through the Word, you are engaging in Christian conversation and in Christian encouragement. And that is preparing your heart to hear from God. That is seeing with spirit eyes. That is allowing the Spirit to work in your life. He will prepare you for the situation when it comes, but we don't need to make that situation happen. Jacob sent gifts ahead. He tried to pave the way. He tried to make things right. In everything that he could do, at all things possible, up to him, he tried to make peace. And he laid the groundwork that he knew to do, but then he called on God and reminded God of the things that, not that God needed reminding. God never needs reminding of anything. But what I think it does is it reminds us of the power of God, the promise of God, and the blessing of God, and what God has already done in our lives. That builds our faith. That builds our faith confidence in order to face the situation. So in all possible ways, let's try to live at peace with others. But when that's not happening, let's meet with God before we meet and prepare ourselves to meet that situation, because it will come around It always comes around. And it might be in a Bible study class when you're the leader and that person is sitting right in front of you and you're asked to make that right in front of everyone. So, yeah, that was a pretty dicey situation, but God managed it. And the happy ending is that this sweet Wendy ended up being my son's preschool teacher, and she also ended up being his teacher at another school as he ended his high school career in the 12th grade. So God brought it full circle. And had we not reconciled, we would have had a real difficult time as teacher and as parent and teacher. So let's live at peace. Let's meet with God before we face our enemy or those that might be against us that we have problems with. We'll see you tomorrow and read through the Word.